What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence and Nortenos acting black. It's a phrase that I've heard many times, so I want to talk about it. And the video is not just about Norteños. It's not even just about raza, right? And it's not even just about blacks, it's a little bit of a bigger conversation. There's probably going to be some stuff in here that everybody agrees with, and those people are going to also find stuff that they don't agree with, and that's fine, right? Like that's what the comment section is for. Let me know what you think, and again, it's just a conversation, right? But so for one, culture is not something to be owned, right? It's throughout history. Culture is shared, right? People take their customs, their traditions, their way of doing things, their style of dress, their way of talking, and then they wind up coming across other people that got a little bit of a different flavor, right? A little bit different way of doing things. And they may borrow from that. They may, put a little twist to it or whatever it may be. And culture evolves over time, right? Everybody's culture does. And so to say that any one group like owns the patent on certain behavior or anything is just not accurate, right? But that doesn't mean it's all fair game either, you know. So where does this real emphasis on culture, like this is my way and that's your way, where does that come from? Because it hasn't always been like that. Culture, it was normal to view it as, again, like an evolutionary, ever changing kind of process. And it was seen as a benefit of humanity, right? Like that's how people learn, that's how stuff changes. So where did it become different in particular in this country? And the reality is, I think it comes after the civil rights era, right? After the civil rights era, after the end of a lot of the Jim Crow laws, right? And U.S. Supreme Court decisions and the Warren Court and everything else, which I won't get into here, but there's a long history of it, right? Then the shift, there's a shift that happened in this country, and it went from the stereotypical historical kind of white people holding non-white people down, right? And white people treating non-white people as inferior. And I'm not saying all white people or anything else, and this is not a let's go bash whitey video, right? It's all, again, just bear with me here, right? And let me say what I gotta say, and then let me know what you think. Uh, but after that, the powers that be, right, which are not all just whites, but the powers that be, the big money people, the big politic people, they came up with like a genius response, right? And tragic and toxic, but genius, in which you don't need this other group to hold your group down or to identify your group. Now everybody put themselves in their own boxes, right? So now all of a sudden, there was all these racial cultures, and I don't want to say all of a sudden as if like people never had a history, right? But the population in the United States started getting divided, right? And instead of divided along class lines, instead of divided along the haves and have-nots, instead of divided along kind of white people that were in power, and then black and brown and Asian and other folks who just didn't even have rights under the law. Now it became everybody got their own club, right? And there's some benefit to that, right? In terms of pride and history and people learning their identity. But there's also a toxic side to that, right? Of this is my group. My group is better than your group, because pride eventually became competition, right? And the government started handing out resources based on how people identify, right? So there's funding for black groups. There's funding for, raza groups, which then they called Hispanic groups. And then later John changed to Latino groups. And so the names of these groups have changed. But now all these different pockets were against each other. And they wound up looking down on one another. They wound up being in competition with one another. But from the outside, it's harder to argue with. It's harder to say, oh, it's racism, because a lot of times it's marginalized groups, right? It's groups that don't have the same amount of resources or don't necessarily have the same opportunities that are then taking shots at each other. And race became a big deal for everybody, right? And that created a mess. And in that mess, there was still this belief that the white way is the right way. And what I mean by that is acting white was a phrase before acting black. That was actually kind of the first race-based phrase. And it was mostly used among black folks and in particular younger ones, right? School-age ones. The phrase comes out of the 1980s. It was a sociologist from like Nigeria or something, I think. And he said, well, what it is students, right? Black students being teased when they were high achieving in school, right? And it's because when you went to a segregated school, all the teachers, all the administrators, everybody that worked at the school was the same race as the students. And now you had integrated schools, right? And in those same race schools, and I'm not suggesting we go back to that time, but we're just showing the change. At that time, if you were a good student, if you were a teacher's pet, you were a teacher's pet for a teacher that looked like you. So it wasn't as if you were trying to be some other race. You might be a goody two shoes, you might be this, but race wasn't in that conversation because everybody was the same race. Then people start getting spread out and going to other schools. And the white population was just the majority. So now you have these black kids going to schools with a lot of white teachers and a lot of white administrators, right? And the normal teenage figuring out your identity and who you were, now also added to that for some populations of people was figuring out what it meant to be black. What did it mean to be Hispanic, right? Not my favorite term, but a popular one at that time. So along with all the normal teenage shit you had to deal with, you also had to figure out what was your racial identity and how were you going to carry that? What did that mean for you? What did that mean for how you interacted with the world? What did that mean for how you interacted with other people of other races? And it's just an added layer that oftentimes white students didn't have, right? And white people in general didn't have because they were used to being the majority in the areas that they were, right? So that's where this kind of acting white comes from. And it's been challenged by other, sociologists and academics and that kind of stuff over the years as to how much of that was really, about race and how much of it was just about normal teenage development and all sort of stuff. So then a flip side came to that, right? Because, now if you're a teacher's pet, you're trying to be white because your teacher's probably right, right? And even in Spanish, right, in Raza communities, it's like the right way of doing things, the proper way of doing things is this way. That's how the white people do it. Our way is this way, right? We can kind of, tweak stuff a little bit. We add a little bit to it. We can, twist it up a little bit. And so there was this difference. And in reaction to that, right? Well, if there's an acting white, then what's acting black? And again, everybody has jumped into their culture boxes, right? And the culture wars. You think about the 80s for those that were around back then. I was a kid, but the 80s was all about the culture wars, right? In response to all this racial and ethnic pride and all these groups centered around certain races, certain ethnicities, certain regions, certain cultures, the response from white America in a lot of places was very conservative, was we're losing our country now, right? Their religions, their way of worship, their way of talk, they're this, they're that, we're losing that. And that's what conservatives appeal to, right? Is back to this, God-fearing, Jesus-centered country, which the United States had never been up until that point and hasn't been since then. But that was their culture argument, right? So everybody had their fight. And in doing that, you keep people from looking at what are the real obstacles, what are the real challenges, who are the real threats to you and people like you and people that you care about advancing, right? And all through the history of the United States, there have been times when people have gotten together on class issues, right? On economic issues, on have versus have not issues, on powerful versus the not powerful issues. And when that happens, real movement starts to take place. Real threats to the establishment start to happen. And so the establishment finds ways to further divide people, right? That's where this whole white identity in the United States came from to begin with, right? Is you had white people working in the same fields as black people and everybody else. Then they got together and was like, hey, we're all kind of screwed. That's the real threat, right? It's the landowner that's the real threat. So then they came through and was like, okay, well, no, the black people are bad people because they're black and white people are good people because they're white. You still have a shitty life, but it's not as shitty as those guys, right? Because they're slaves. And people bought into it. Okay, well, at least I'm not at the bottom, right? And it's survival, right? You had Raza in Texas going to court, fighting to be called white, right? We don't want to be called anything. We want to be called white because they seen what was happening to black people and they were like, we don't want that shit to happen to us. So how do we align ourselves with those that are in power, right? And the effects of colonialism and all that stuff too, right? So black folks, right? And Raza and everybody, it's not just them, but started saying, hey, this is our thing, right? Like the braiding of the hair, the doing this stuff, the way that we cook our food, the way that we talk, right? And cutting some letters off the end and abbreviating stuff and whatnot. That's our way of doing things, and it's okay and it works and we understand it and we're fine with it, Well, then as time goes on, you get these non-marginalized groups, right? These groups that the folks that are a part of groups, right? Where they used to talk down on people, it's even think about language, kids used to be forced to sit in a corner with a dunce cap on their head because they were speaking Spanish. Now you have to learn a foreign language in high school and Spanish is the most popular option, right? How things have changed, braids in your hair and afros and that kind of stuff was looked at as like foreign. That's those people, headscarves and that kind of stuff. And then white people started adopting it, right? And well, now braids are cool. Now braids are acceptable. And so minority groups naturally took a response of like, hold on, all of a sudden now, like these are our cultures, these are our traditions that we've had for a long time. And you people used to look at us crazy for it, but now it's becoming ethnic and it's becoming stylish and it's becoming in vogue. And so you're adopting it without still acknowledging that we were beautiful all along or we were doing stuff right all along or there was no threat to our way of doing things. So then it gets offensive, right? Because your people are ridiculed for something until the day that they decide, actually, I like this too. And now they're co-opting it and you get cultural appropriation and culture vultures. So it's a very emotional topic for a lot of people, for white people, for black people, for Raza, for everybody, right? But there is no such thing as acting black or acting brown or acting white or acting Asian, right? That's my dog in the background. There really isn't, because within those groups of people, right? Like I know black folks that hate rap music, right? Won't listen to it at all. Listen to nothing but gospel. I know black folks that have never sagged their pants. Black folks that, all the stereotypes, right? That don't do that. I know Raza that doesn't speak Spanish, right? At all. That don't like beans and rice and tortillas, right? There's Asians that are not good at math. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that to make fun of anybody. I'm saying that to show that these stereotypes, right? Within any group of people, there's such a wide range that not everybody fits in a box, and as time has gone on, and in particular in lower income communities, as people started to live together, right? As they started to be closer to each other. And we saw this more in Northern California historically than you did in Southern California, because in Southern California, the way that they divided up neighborhoods was very racial, right? Black people can only live here, brown people can only live here, white people can only live here, period. So you grow up in a neighborhood, some folks grew up in neighborhoods where there was nobody who looked different than them, right? And in Northern California, not that there's none of those neighborhoods, right? But the lower income neighborhoods, which are the neighborhoods, historically that got black and brown folks in them, there was a lot of overlap, right? And as Raza moved up north and just kind of increased in numbers, and at the same time that black people were looking to get out of the projects and get out of the hood and not be there anymore, so vacancies were created. There started to be a lot more black and brown overlap, and then you add the Asians and the Polynesians and everybody else. So kids want to do what's cool, right? And this stuff was made cool, right? Rap went mainstream. I remember when I was a kid, if you watched the Grammys, there was no rap awards. And when they started, having rap awards, it would tell you at the bottom of the screen who won what, but it wasn't televised, right? They would never have the rap category televised. The rappers weren't invited to the Grammys. Absolutely not. Because most of the people, their belief, right? Most of the people that watch the Grammys don't want to see this, right? This is gangster music. This is that. But then gangster becomes cool. Hip hop becomes cool. Now it's in commercials. Again, there's advertising. There's powers that be. When you have people divided by culture, right? And you have people feeling like they need to lock in with some notion of culture, right? This is what you people do. This is what you people do. This is what we do. That helps in advertising. Now advertising is geared for a certain culture, right? Oh man, we want to get part of the black audience. Well, let's air this on this TV channel, right? Let's incorporate this kind of music. Let's do this. And all very stereotypical, all kind of racist. Not racist as in one group is better than the other, but racist in the sense of you're painting with a broad brush and you're identifying people. You're acting like you know somebody's get down just based on the color of their skin and their facial features and what kind of hair they have. And that's just not an accurate judge of who anybody is, right? There's really shitty people of every race and there's really awesome people of every race. And so that's a very narrow way to view things. But for the economy and for profiting and for making money, it makes it convenient. Okay, I can kind of capture this audience. And part of this flooding of culture, right, is stick with your own, represent your own, support your own. And don't get me wrong, it makes sense to support people that you identify with. It makes sense to look out for people you identify with. That's not unusual. That doesn't mean everybody that looks like you is worthy of your support, right? And anybody who doesn't look like you is not worthy of your support. Like I said, there's righteous and unrighteous people of every possible persuasion. So it's all just division is what it comes down to, right? And yes, there's a backlash, right? Predominantly by people of color, because there's a belief, like I said, that our ways, whatever those ways are, right? Our ways were ridiculed. They were put down. They were pushed to the side. This is an English only country, fool. And you still hear that shit sometimes. Not by most white people or anything else, but you still do hear it, right? Again, but your kids are taking Spanish classes in school, Oh, you can't dress like this. You can't this. So all this division, it keeps people separated and it causes a reaction, again, from marginalized folks, from people who were mocked or dismissed or told that they're dirty or their cooking sucks or they're ugly or whatever else. And when you start to see those very things get adopted by the dominant group, so to speak, right? Then it's kind of like, hold on. Now all of a sudden, because you say it's okay. And then there's a mocking. And are you being authentic about it, right? Or are you doing this to clown? Are you doing this out of appreciation? If it is out of appreciation, how come you don't treat the people who are most responsible for showing you that culture with a little more respect, right? With a little more dignity, right? Is it all just performative, right? Nancy Pelosi in the Capitol with a fucking dashiki, or is it true? Is it from a place of admiring and respect and appreciation? Well, then let's look at how you treat other people. And now there's a disconnect. So all this culture stuff, history is important. Culture is important. The more you trace any culture back, the more you will see how it was influenced by other cultures. And just the reality is, like I said, there's no patent on it. Nobody owns it. So do Norteños act black? No. Are there people in the Bay Area that are black and brown and white and Asian and Polynesian and whatnot who act similar? Yes. Right? And I think, again, there's a difference there. And we're noticing it because now here it is 2024. And what do you have? A bunch of Southsiders that are dressing different and talking different, and they're using the N-word, and they're doing all this stuff. And I don't think it comes from anybody trying to be like another race. It's normalized in your community, right? The music you listen to says this. The images you see on TV of what's cool look like this, right? So all young people, for the most part, want to be unique and independent and stand out as long as they're just like all their friends, right? And what race you are doesn't really factor into that. And so it's a mingling. It's a cross-section. It's a popularizing of stuff. It's what's put out on the media. And the powers that be just want the money. There became money in that stuff. And once there's money in it, that is the goal. And nothing else really matters. So we, as people who don't have a ton of resources, regardless of what race you are, us who are lower on the economic totem pole, get so caught up with these arguments and this fighting and this division, and we don't fuck with them and they don't fuck with us, and this is, my style and that's you, and you're stealing and you can't do this, and well, if you can do this, how come I can't do that? And all these trivial arguments, right, that cause us to look at each other sideways, over something. Oh, bro, you don't respect my people. You don't respect my people. Your people is a range. Your people is some highly conservatives and some highly liberals and a whole lot of folks in between. They're doctors and lawyers and professionals, and they're homeless and they're drug addicts and they're blue collar workers and they're convicts and they're children and they're men and they're women and they're gay and they're straight and they're all of us, your people, right? If we're looking at a race sense or a culture sense or an ethnicity sense, involves all of that. And it got to a point where people position themselves as leaders of certain cultures, right? Because they got fame from it, right? Poverty pimping. Now all of a sudden they're the gatekeeper. They're the spokesperson. And how do they stay in power? And how do they stay relevant? To fight for the culture, right? And how do you fight for the culture? You call out other cultures. You point out when they're not doing right by you and this and that. And I'm not saying that people don't offend one another, right? And I'm not saying that there's not disrespect. But who puts these people in charge, right? And who really are they speaking for? Because again, there are black people of every style imaginable. There are brown people of every style imaginable. There are white people of every style imaginable. So who are you really speaking for, right? You're just making noise because of the attention. So anyways, I know this video is a little all over the place, right? But I hope it makes a little sense. And again, I'm not here to offend anybody, but rather, let's have a conversation, right? And what you guys think. And again, there are people, things have a history. Things start somewhere, things adjust somewhere. The longer back you look, the more you will find that there's outside influences. So I don't have a problem personally with people like, oh man, that's my people's get down, right? Because those are the people that kind of introduced it to the masses in recent history. But to think that means you own it is not the case. I think folks are falling for the bait. They're falling for the trap. And everybody does it. Every race of people does it. Every ethnicity does it, right? It's not unique to anybody else. But this whole Norteños acting black thing, like I said, I hear about it all the time. I get asked about it. It was suggested to me as a topic. And I'm like, bro, Norteños don't act black. Just like Sureños aren't acting black. It's but we hear these accusations, and so we want to find a way to throw an accusation towards somebody else, right? And in the meanwhile, we're just creating more barriers and less dialogue. So there you have it. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And like I said, let me know what you think. It's a little bit of a different topic, but I think it's an interesting conversation, you know. And so you guys take care, man. Stay tuned. More stuff coming up.